I'm Jack. I'm an undergrad at Denver, and I'm a marketing major. And my last South by Southwest session that I went to today was Spurs on Impact, which was about a sports agency started by some women, and two of them were there to talk about kind of what women's role in sports is, what kind of cultural roles there are in the world, and whose responsibility it is to talk about things like equity and equality within the sports world, and how to kind of get involved in that. So one of them was an NBC Sports anchor as well, and the other was actually a WNBA owner in Atlanta. So she's really concerned they're really concerned with equality and in terms of like discrimination against people in Black and brown communities, but also women in sports, and kind of giving them a voice. Sport is basically the opportunity for athletes to do that work and kind of get their message out, especially if they're in underrepresented communities. So it was cool to kind of hear them talk about how that has been on their minds, and how they've been able to utilize that platform themselves. And they talked a lot about the pandemic and the kind of the George Floyd protests and things that went on. And they personally had gotten a lot of hate in a way from people that didn't like that they were speaking out about what they wanted, and they felt like it was a perfect time to do it because this wave of social justice was coming up, and they were pretty upset about that. So basically they talked about how that period really changed their mindset in terms of how an athlete can communicate themselves in a way that is better for them, and in a way that doesn't hurt their careers. For example, I mean, Colin Kaepernick would be one of those who kneeled during that national anthem. He's a prime example of that, but you want to be able to share your voice, and athletes are finding more ways to do that. In the NBA, they're talking about how it's much easier to do that than in the NFL. The NFL structurally is much different than the NBA, and the NBA people have a lot more freedom to voice their concerns and things. They were actually talking about how the WNBA sort of led the charge in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement within the NBA itself, and in sports, and kind of the MLB kind of signed on as well, and other sports too. So they're talking about how that was really integral for them and important, because I think the Atlanta Dream, which is the WNBA team that this woman owns, was one of the first to kind of stop playing games and sort of take a knee, in a sense, to the violence that was going on and police brutality. And they talked about how the funding is different for women and men in sports, and a lot of that has to do with just what gets more views, but some of it they mentioned has to do with funding as well, and what kind of funding goes to where, and how that can make get their brand out there. And there's not a lot of that for the WNBA, so it doesn't really have as much of a chance to get out there. But again, I mean, it may not be as strong in terms of a brand as the NBA, but it still doesn't have quite the same opportunities. So the athlete's reality is different, and that's another thing they emphasized. And they really thought that people should have these conversations that they're not having, and discuss sort of how they were able to do that and how they should do that in the future. So